Hello, hello. We are a couple of minutes late. I'm a few weeks late. I haven't done a LinkedIn Live for ages. My stepson, Sharon's son, had to move back in, so I was out of my office and working from a downstairs room for a little while, but I'm back. And once I know we're live, I'm going to bring on Dave Bradburn of Opus Creative Design, and it tells me here that Stephen Thomas is live right now. Let's just turn that off. If I'm looking down, if you've watched this before, you know this, but if I'm looking down, it's just because I am doing something on the laptop screen to tag Dave in or something like that. And you could do me a massive favour. If you're watching, I'm doing a couple of things down on the screens right now. If you're watching, if you could let us know that you're watching, leave me a comment or a like or something like that, just to let me know that you can see me, and then I'll know that we're absolutely there. Someone's just liked it. I didn't get to see who that was, but I'm getting some likes going through. If you don't mind leaving a comment. If you've got any questions to ask, I'm going to be speaking to Dave Bradburn of Opus Creative Design. If you've got any questions to ask about design, about branding, about why brands and logos are different things, if you've got any questions at all to ask, pop them down in the comments, and we'll answer them live as we go on this afternoon. And if you're watching, if you can see us, then pop that in the comments as well. I can see some likes going through, but comments would be hugely appreciated. I always think I'm talking to myself until I've got other people here actually saying something. I've always got this horrible feeling that I'm talking to myself, no matter how many of these that I do. I'm going to bring... Hi Samuel, it's really good to see you. Let's just pop that up on screen. That's what I'm going to be doing with comments later on. So if you've got any questions to ask, bring them up on screen. And Harvey, it's great to see you as well. Harvey, I hope it's going to be an interesting conversation too. So instead of me just talking, I'm going to bring Dave Bradburn up on screen. Samuel's already asked a question, so I'm going to let Dave introduce himself, Samuel, and then we'll come to your question in a few minutes' time. So thank you ever so much for that. Hello, Dave. Tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Hi, afternoon, and hoping it's going to be an interesting conversation as well, I guess. My business is graphic design and brand identity. I've done that for more years than I care to add up now. The business is about 15 years now, and worked for agencies before that. So it's working with a whole range of different businesses, producing communications materials for them of one form or another, branding materials, and just helping them to stand out and to communicate, really.
And I know you have some specific types and sectors of businesses that you work with their brand and identity as well.
Yeah, I do. There's a few have come about, one either by design or sometimes just by circumstances. So there's a lot of professional services businesses that I work with and do work in that sector. Also, quite a lot though has come about with schools, and it's a slightly interesting sector to get into. But once you're in there, there's a good amount that can be done. In that case, a lot of that is driving towards applications for students to enrol at a particular school, whether it's at the early years, end of it, primary, or going through into secondary and then sixth forms as well. And then the other sector is in the arts, and quite a bit with a couple of art galleries that I work with, and some choirs and choral organisations. And some of that goes back a hell of a long time, really, to when I've sung in choirs as a teen and into certainly 20s and things, not so much now, but it's come through from that, and connections and networking, I guess, made at that point, really.
Do you know what? I didn't know that about your history singing in choirs.
No, it's never been that cool to boast about, I guess. So maybe that's why I've not shared it as much. But
We
I've done a
need
lot
to
of that.
introduce you to Howard Feather down here, a business coach down here in Oxfordshire at some point, because Howard still does sing in choirs, and I don't know whether he
Right.
did don't know whether he did May Morning in Oxford this year, but he's done that in the past. I'm going to hello Dean, hello Candup, Samuel does a load of stuff in the metaverse with NFTs, with apps, with a ton of modern stuff. And Samuel has asked our first question, which is a pretty good place for us to start. So I'm going to bring it up on screen. And Samuel has asked, what's the best order to do your branding and design? Where do you start, Dave? When someone comes to you and wants to start talking to you about design, where do you start with them? What's the best order to do things in?
Well, there's a as with so many things, there's a bit of it depends about it. But the initial thought is that really with branding and certainly the brand identity, you don't really want to be churning a load of other things out before you've got that in place, because you're going to have to do it twice. So if you can, it's pinning down some of the branding in the wide context, and then working on the brand identity in order that you've then got that on which to sort of build other things around. However, there is a little bit that I think sometimes that side of things can be one of those big hurdles to get over and prevent people just get going. And there's certainly a lot to be said for get things out there, even if it's not perfect first. Often, say with startup businesses, I recommend actually that they maybe put together something, their visual brand, their brand identity and things, put it together pretty quickly, get something together. It maybe doesn't need that huge sort of process of going through it that you might do at a slightly later stage. But really, it's important just to get going and test the concept as well that you've got there, because there've been so many businesses that you see, they start off, they think that the focus of the business is going to be in a certain place, but then as they develop, it turns out that it's maybe there's some elements of that, but it's not quite where they first originated it, first anticipated it, should I say. So actually, they're best to get going, get going on some basic stuff first, test the concept, work out if it works, and then maybe 18 months down the line or something like that, revisit it and really pin it down at that point.
And when someone starts, then I've got a question from Harvey as well. I'll bring that up on the screen in a little while. What sort of questions are you going to be asking them, for example, to get under the skin of what their brand actually is? What sort of questions would you ask them in a brief that you were taking? What sort of questions should business owners think about?
Yeah, inevitably we talk about all the side of things like the values, who they're working with, who the type of clients are that they're aiming at, and the way in which they wish to work. But so often the big thing in most conversations is what the objectives are as well, because it really isn't uncommon at all for people to come along and initially they want some work doing or something, but they've not really thought through what they want to achieve as a result of that. Now, it's not, I don't blame them for that. If you only can come along and talk about what you already know. But so much with design, it's very easy to make things look pretty and to make them something that looks nice, but something that's actually looks good and is effective is far more involved, really. And it's getting to that. So looking at everything from my client's point of view, or their client's point of view, if you like. So looking at what will need to be seen, what are the barriers for people and things like that. So.
We're getting a load of questions, which is absolutely brilliant.
That's good.
That I've worked with you for a long time, Dave, and you've created the brand behind some of the businesses that I've created, the Networking Retreat very particularly. And I think in words, and what I love about working with someone who has your skills is that you're able to use my words to suddenly create something where I'm able to say, yeah, that's it. That's what I was thinking of. Harvey's asked a question which not all of the question will fit on screen. So Harvey's question is, when creating a brand design, do you try and create for various different applications and sizes, i.e. differences between branding, literature and merchandise as well? And I know that Harvey's interest is in merchandise, so I'm guessing that's, or promotional merchandise. Right. I'm guessing that's where the question will come from.
Yeah, well, if with a brand identity, a logo, if you're reducing it down to that, it should work at all sizes. That's, it should also work in black and white rather than just colour as well. So, going back to certainly when I did training and when there was a junior learning off some of my senior colleagues, being able to have a logo work in black and white was far more important than it is now in some respects, because far more limitations on print at the time, or expense to colour print. That doesn't tend to be the case anymore. Certainly online we've got no restriction on colours, and even in print, it's opened up that colour printing is far more accessible. But still, really, if it's to be successful, then I still believe that a good identity should work in just a single colour as well, if it has to. But when you're designing for different sizes and things, again, that it should be able to be scaled up or down so that it'll work on a pen, or it'll work on the size of a building as well. And if it doesn't do that, then really there's a weakness in the design. There are sometimes ways that you adapt it. There's sometimes it's worth having the option, where, I don't know, if you've got, say, a logo that involves a symbol and some text alongside it, you may well have the primary version may well be, for example, that the symbol is to the left and with the text to the right. But also then there'll be certain situations where you might want, rather than that landscape shape, you may want a squarer format. So it's often worth having that secondary version in the set of logos that enables you to fit when the space is more restricted. You've got a different version that will fit around a different way. So you should really have a few logos that will do that within the set. You'll have a primary one, and you'll have one that works in that format. You might have one that works on a dark background rather than a light background and things like that. So that you've got a suite of logos that all work together. But yeah, it's a weakness in the design if it can't work in all sizes and formats.
I mean, that's incredibly interesting, because you see people do so many different things with their branding now, including things like car wraps, which I see quite a lot of when I turn up at networking and business events and that sort of thing. And I like what you've said there, that it's a weakness in it if it doesn't work everywhere. And I don't think, to my shame, I don't think I've got any branded or promotional pens down here at the moment, but that sort of thing for shows and people doing business shows, they want to be able to give out something that people will remember. Yeah. I'm just going to bring one more question up on screen and realise that my water bottle is in camera. Let's move that out of the way. I'm going to bring one more question up on screen before I do something else for a second. Kandap asks, what do you mean by building an identity, or from where a startup should start from? What should be the absolute start for someone who's wanting to build their brand identity?
Sorry, can't see. I'm not sure the full.
No, we don't get the whole of the question. So it's what do you mean by building an identity, or from where a startup should start from?
Yeah, well, really, I'm just meaning that sometimes it's a case of get something in place and get going, really. And so by an identity, the identity a lot of the time is meaning the logo, a little bit beyond that, colour palette, fonts and things like that are set as well. So really but if you're starting up, get something in place. It doesn't have to be perfect. If you're waiting for everything to be absolutely perfect, you'll just spend a couple more months before you get going. And really, you're better to be out there and earning some money, proving that the concept works first. It can then come back, as I said before, and revise that, tweak it. It may be that you completely revise it. It might be that it's just evolved on from what you've got. But just get going really on it from startup point of view.
I'm just going to take a really quick break in proceedings and make sure that people can see that I am talking this afternoon to Dave Bradburn. If you're not connected with Dave already, there's his LinkedIn details there. You'll find him on LinkedIn as Dave Bradburn, Opus Creative Design. Go and connect with Dave if you're watching us this afternoon and don't already know him. I've got Dave's website all set up and ready to go as well, which gives actually a huge idea of the sort of stuff that Dave works with as well. Which there's at least one on there that I recognise as well. I recognise who the client is. So if you don't already know Dave, that's where you can go and connect with him. And I strongly recommend that you do. I know that Dave puts a ton of information out there on his LinkedIn profile about design as well. I'm going to bring us back on screen. If anyone's got any questions, do pop them in the comments. A number of people have asked questions already, and we've tried to answer them along the way. And if you've got any more, if you're watching for Dave Bradburn or for me, what's the mistake that you think, or what's the biggest mistake or most common mistake that you see businesses making, Dave? I know you're a big fan of minimum viable proposition and getting going and evolving along the way, but do a load of businesses make a common mistake when they get started with their brand or design?
I think sometimes the mistake that you see made is that the design and the communication is for them. In some cases for the designer, actually, is what they want in their portfolio. But sometimes, more common than that is that it's designed for the business owner. And actually, it shouldn't be designed for the business owner. It should be designed for their client, the people that they're trying to attract. So, as I briefly touched on before, if you're designing, for example, we'll say it's a leaflet, whether that's printed or PDF, whatever. You want something to happen at the end of that. You've got it there for a purpose. So if you've got it in front of, an ideal client, and they read through it, it's got to speak to them. And at the end of it, they've got to be compelled to take some kind of action, really. And if you've not planned through what that action should be, what that goal that you want to aim for is, and if you've not given them the relevant information that will steer them towards that, then actually it's probably pushing out information that you want to push out, but it's not really considering the information that is relevant to that client. Design is very much there to support the words that are there as well. So, if you've got the copy written, and you've got some images there that are also there to help illustrate the copy, draw people's attention to it, and get people to read. The design should be there to support it, to make it easy for people to read and access the information, to encourage them to do so, and to read through and then take that action in the end. So it's all there to work together, but really to drive towards a goal. And often that's the bit that tends to be forgotten, really.
I think that's the case with pretty much all marketing, that business owners don't always think through, they don't think through clearly who they're talking to, and they try and talk to everyone. And then in their messaging, and that words are my thing, they don't think through, they write stuff or create designs which is going to suit them rather than talking directly to their customer. It's interesting to me that I've always thought that through in terms of the customer journey with words. I hadn't completely thought through that applied to design as well. I think a lot of business owners start, that I've seen, by thinking that they need a logo rather than necessarily thinking any further into the future than that. Yeah,
sometimes that can be sort of seen in isolation almost, and we don't see logos in isolation. They're part of something bigger. So it's rare that it should be just seen as a standalone thing, really.
And do, I guess, it becomes questionable whether every business needs a website these days, with things like Eventbrite and Etsy and all of the social media channels that people can put their businesses. In your opinion, which I fully accept might be biased, do people need a brand identity? Do people need a logo, a graphic identity in order to launch a business now?
There are examples of some businesses that run without ever having that, without, they're often those sort of, the business is in the background of it. Probably you need something there that is consistently applied, I think, if it's something that clients are going to be coming in contact with. So if they're going to actually see some information from the business or whatever like that, then I think probably there needs to be some form of identity to it. if only for the consistency, really, that actually each place that you see it, then it's the same. You do, too often you see businesses around that have got sort of about 12 versions of the logo, all slightly different, and it seems that one day they fancy doing something different, and that undermines your confidence in it. Really, it undermines. Is this the same business? Is it the same one? What's going on with this? And just it chips away at it. Now that business may well function okay on it, but with a little bit of work, they could smarten it up and make sure there's that consistency across. But yeah, I think it's wise to at least have that. At least have a consistent logo, a consistent color palette, consistent typography, really, or font choices certainly, and just be trying to follow that through, follow the same tone, the same tone of copy or whatever going out as well, just so that you know where you stand with it, really.
Yeah, I think myself, like a number of other business owners, and particularly in the speaking space, I guess there's more than one business around me. So for me, it works for them to have separate identities, and for those separate identities to be obvious. Stephen Thomas, the Networking Retreat, Connect, they're all separate entities in their own rights, and it's useful to have that separated by design as well. Talking to Dave Bradburn, I'm talking about design, branding, graphic design. If you've got any questions about that, or if you've just joined us, as I can see some people have joined us, pop them in the comments below. We'll be thrilled to answer them. I'm going to ask the how long is a piece of string question myself, but I'll be interested in your answer. What does it cost to what does it cost to get going? What does it cost to have a serious graphic and brand design created? What should people be looking at if they're just getting started?
Yeah, I mean, as you said, it is something of as long as a piece of string. But I think you can get going for a few £100, that sort of thing. Really, it doesn't put a logo, ideally a logo, maybe a few other bits around it in place, and just have that consistency going. Know what your colours are, that sort of thing. You can get that for a few hundred, certainly under 500. And then, but if you're doing, as the business grows, you'll need more things. You end up generating more bits, and probably also you're at the point where your capacity to do things yourself is reduced down because you're doing what you do. So actually, you end up outsourcing some of the things as well. So inevitably, as you end up having lead magnets designed for you, if you have templates for those, you have downloads that you may have, all kinds of brochures or whatever that you may need, maybe social media templates rather than doing them yourselves in Canva or something like that, then it mounts up. But you're talking a few grand and things like that, I would imagine, as it built up. Probably not all done in one go though, in that case. And website on top of that as well. So yeah, you can get going from a few hundred and upwards of there, really, as it grows. And yeah, it depends on the nature of the business as well, really. Some businesses, the requirement for things is far more than others. So as long as a piece of string, really, as you say.
I think that's important though, because I believe we're at a time when quite a lot of people are starting businesses, and I believe we are constantly at a time when working with a graphic designer who actually understands the business is important. I'm not just saying that because you're on here. I genuinely believe that that's the case. Someone who's going to understand the business and understand the branding of the business. So actually talking to someone about it and getting going with someone with something that you can scale up in future, with something that you start to get right in the first place, so that if you want a website built, you can use that foundation to do that. If you want promotional material, you can go and talk to someone like Harvey and get that done. But having that foundation right and having someone you can work with and talk to about it makes so much sense to me, because it is, along with copywriting, graphic design is something to me that people shouldn't try and scrimp on. People shouldn't try and do it on the cheap, because often people are selling services that are quite expensive with graphic design that looks like it's been done on the cheap, and I don't think those two things quite hang together. I once met, this is a long time ago, so it will, I won't be unfair talking about it directly. I once met with a person who was selling property investment at a networking event who, could quadruple your money or do something like that, and was investing in multi-million deals, and on the back of his business card it said printed free by Vistaprint, and those two things
Yeah,
just didn't
yeah,
didn't stack together for me. And I think people need to think through the I can't think of the word. It's too hot to think of the word that I'm thinking of. But the making sure that all joins up.
yeah, yeah. I think so. I mean, if you look at the whole thing of brand as well, I think that becomes a very confused term, really, doesn't it? As well, and people, it's so much muddy water around it, largely off the back of people selling services through it. But really, it's a fairly simple thing, and we'll all have a brand whether we like it or not. Really, it'll exist. It's just that if you don't do anything about it, it'll be pretty, it'll be inconsistent, and just it's not going to hang together well. So really, the whole branding thing is just assessing how you work, how you want to work, how you want to be in touch with people, and then steering that a little bit, really giving that some shape, and making sure that the way that you act, the way that you do everything is in line with that, but also the way that you present yourself in all ways is consistent with it as well. So if then, like you say, you're presenting something in, which you're selling properties or something, it's got to come across that you know what you're doing, that you're comfortable in that environment, you experienced in it, and for that, there's obviously a link to the finance side of it. So then, if you're doing things on the cheap with the free Vistaprint cards, it's just going to be incongruous with it, isn't it? And it's those little things that sort of thing is going to, well, as you give the example straight away, it undermined anything else that they'd said, that they'd done, or anything else they'd presented to you was undermined by that one little thing. So it's just really understanding the implications of all these things, and how it's going to build up that picture in people's mind of what your brand is, what you stand for.
I'm just going to bring that back up on screen and remind people that I'm talking to Dave Bradburn this afternoon. And if you're not connected with Dave, Dave is a graphic designer. I've been working with him for years. I've known Dave for years as well through networking and as a friend. Dave is a member of Connect, which is one of the reasons that I'm talking to him this afternoon. And if you're not connected to him already, there's his details, and I suggest you go and connect with Dave. It will be worth your while. Keep an eye on his timeline as well. Him and his business, Opus Creative Design, put out a load of information about branding and design, along with a load of advice that you can take. I think something that let's just bring us back here. So if we think about my own situation, the networking retreat branding you did some years ago in consultation with
Yeah,
with me,
yeah,
and we are launching the networking retreat again, obviously after 2 years off that we know about, and it's on my mind that we should now evolve that. Is that also something that people can do, that we can evolve the brand going forward? I always hear different points of view on this. The Coca-Cola brand has remained broadly the same throughout its history. The BBC changed their brand pretty regularly. Is branding something that can evolve over time?
yeah. It can, and all of those big corporations, Coca-Cola, it looks the same, but it has been tweaked over the years and things like that. Like very subtle evolutions of it. You know, companies, you do need to update things from time to time, and a lot of the bigger brands do regularly just update the logo. It may only be a small amount. It may only be small tweaks to it and evolutions. I've slipped into my own mistake there, saying logo rather than the wider brand as well. But it all they are evolved on and just tweaked. Sometimes it's a case that it's appropriate to do that. That it's appropriate just to sort of tweak things here and there. You maybe adjust colours. You might adjust the cut of how a symbol is done. It could be that the typography is slightly adjusted and things like that. Sometimes you go for a very more radical change to it, really, and almost go for a blank canvas and reintroduce it. It depends on what needs doing. Does that identity do justice to the business anymore? Really, does it need to change? Does it need to be a more radical change to reflect what's going on? Or is it appropriate to have that sort of continuity and fairly subtle change in it? But if you don't do anything at all, you end up suddenly it's 5, 10, 15 years, and suddenly you'll find that you've got something that looks dated, really. And that's why things will move on. And there's appropriate times to do that. It's obviously, if you it's always a little bit unfair when you hear in the press that the cost of, say, the BBC implementing a new logo, because the press will reduce it down to a logo only, and also they'll sort of quote the fees for redoing that as if it's just the design bit, but actually it's rolling it out across everything that they need to roll it out across. So, I always avoid getting into those debates when you sort of get them on LinkedIn and elsewhere, really, about the sort of cost of some new branding being done for a big corporation, because often there's far more to the brief than actually is implied in the initial conversation. But yeah, there's good reason for evolving things on at times, and the BBC is one actually. I like what they've done with that latest one. Actually, it's some nice flexibility to it. It works where they need it to, and yeah. Without getting into all the technicalities, there was a lot of sense behind doing it, really.
I think that's interesting because it's, as you say, there's a lot more that goes into it. I've done some work with businesses on internal branding, because something that you said earlier really interested me, that we've all got a brand. Businesses all have a brand, whether we like it or not. It's up to us whether we attempt to influence that brand, attempt to do something about it, but making sure that the branding internally is reflected by everyone who works in it. And to use a buzz phrase which has been going around for a few years, as long as you and I have been going networking, what do you think the difference is between branding and personal branding? A conversation that's going on out there a lot at the moment.
I think really it's all to do with how you present yourself. I'm sure that other people will have other opinions on it as well, but I think it's harder to see that difference if you're a one-person business or a 2-3 people business. That actually you and your personality is often what your business is built around anyway. So I think probably it gets harder to sort of understand that difference there. It becomes maybe easier to see it when you imagine someone in a slightly larger business and the way that their business has its brand, and then maybe that individual within it has that as well, I think. So, I suppose that's where the two start to separate more, where often, there's certainly some types of business coaching, consultancy, and those types of things, pretty much they cross over so much that it is quite tricky to see the difference, I think, really.
I certainly think from my point of view, because I sort of reflect this back on myself as a speaker, and with the consultancy work I do, the brand is very much Stephen Thomas, and it is all about me. With things like Connect, I want that brand to be separate from my personal brand, albeit influenced by it, because I want that to stand on its own. Back in the day, I used to work for Nigel Dixon and Co. estate agents, and of course once Nigel retired, it was really difficult for the business to keep going under the existing branding, because people would still believe that it was Nigel who owned it and ran it, and the next owner was. It was more difficult for him to take it on for that reason. So I think that's with Connect and with the networking retreat, they are things that I've tried to slightly separate from Stephen Thomas, so that I can retain my personal brand, but they can build a brand. And I guess Yes, I guess many other people have done that before me in far bigger businesses. I'm talking to Dave Bradburn for another 4 or 5 minutes. If you've got any questions, pop them in the comments below. I'll bring them up on screen as I have done with some of the other questions before. If you are still with us, and a number of people have stayed with us for the whole of this conversation, thank you for that. And you're not already connected with Dave, that is where to find him on LinkedIn. As well as LinkedIn, Dave, where else should people look for you? Where would be other places that you'd be happy to connect with people?
The Facebook page is Opus Creative Design is the one that I'm pretty active on, and trying to get more and more reliable on posting on Instagram as well, and that side of things. So yeah, that's Opus Creative DB on Instagram as well. So yeah, those two where I can be found from time to time. So.
I'm getting them. If it looks like I'm doing something down here, I'm getting them up on screen so that people can see them. I know I'm connected with you in both places. There we go. So let's pull that one up on screen. There's Opus Creative Design on Facebook, where you'll also find a ton of advice and case studies and that sort of thing from Dave going on in there. There's Opus Creative DB on Instagram, where you'll find slightly less at the moment, but go and follow Dave over there anyway, and I'm sure he'll put more on there as well. On LinkedIn, I know that Dave puts advice and commentary, and in the posts and content that he puts out there, Dave puts a load of advice out there as well. Before we wrap up, and before we let people get back to their afternoon, is there any overriding piece of advice that you would give to someone, Dave, who's considering working with a graphic designer? Let's start with there. If someone feels that they're at the stage where they need to, what advice would you give them?
I think speak to them, get a feel for who's right for you, because my feel is I work best with someone when I'm almost working in partnership with them, and for that reason I need to be, get on well enough with them really, and if you're able to have that open, honest conversation about things, then you give them the opportunity to understand them. Also, though, they should be asking the questions that enable them to get that understanding. So, if they're not asking the questions, if they're leaping to assumptions on things, then you maybe need to stop them there and just steer them on the right path, or find someone who does ask those questions as well. So yeah, it's really about very much working in partnership. If a design is going to be if a designer is going to be successful with you and they're going to be able to work with you well, they're going to need to be able to understand you, and they're going to need to take the time to understand you, to ask the questions that enable them to do that. And you're going to need to be open and honest enough with them to let them in as well, really. So yeah, very much working to that partnership way of working, really.
We've got a very final question from Harvey, which I really like actually. Is iconography becoming more important for immediate recognition? The way that I read that, I think I'm reading this right, Harvey. Please do correct me if I'm wrong. I think Harvey's talking about the sort of logo where we immediately recognise who the brand is, even if we don't see all of the logo, for example. If I'm reading that right, if you're reading it different, Dave, tell me. And if I'm getting that wrong, Harvey, then do correct me. Is iconography becoming more important for immediate reaction and create a call to action? Harvey has added to that as well.
Yeah, I think I don't know whether it's changing, but probably the amount of content that we see online, you need to be able to immediately recognize what it is. Yeah, in some ways it may be iconography, color, or something. There's familiarity really, and that consistency that we mentioned before. Because if you scroll down on LinkedIn or wherever else, you'll stop at the things that grab your attention, won't they? And often those things is, you scroll down and you see someone who puts out good content, you'll stop and have a glance there. So yeah, maybe certainly the icons and things like that can play a part in that, and that familiarity, not necessarily having to see the full side of it. and yeah, and was it in call to action was the other aspect of it,
Yes,
wasn't
and
it? So
and create a call to action. Harvey says.
yeah, I think certainly that's the important bit. You've got to be having those call to actions throughout and everything, and it all plays a part together. I think. Yeah.
Dave, the time's gone really quickly. Actually, I've really
It has,
enjoyed.
yeah, yeah.
I've really
So,
enjoyed talking to you this afternoon. Thank you ever so much for giving up your time. If anyone's got
no,
any
thank you
other
very much.
questions on the replay, then pop them in the comments below afterwards on the replay, and I'll tag Dave in them every time, so he'll be able to answer them. Dave, thank you very much for being here this afternoon.
Oh, thank you for having me there, and thank you everyone for listening as well.
Yeah, I'm going to, just before I press the button, Dave, as I'll bring your website back on screen, I'm